call our next speaker, Fred Trotter. Fred is a leading authority on the intersection of health, IT, and cybersecurity. He was a founding member of the first healthcare industry cybersecurity task force and co-authored the report on improving the cybersecurity of healthcare industry, which was presented to the US Congress in June 2017. Fred is currently the CTO at CareSet Systems, which commercializes medical data, and he works to protect the privacy and security of Medicare and Medicaid recipients, as well as leverage data sets to improve healthcare delivery in the United States. Please help me welcome Fred Trotter.
So I vaguely remember how to use Windows. That's me. Yes, it is. I think there's a, I think there's a way to play it. Could be wrong. Try that. Oh, there we go. Thanks. Hello. So my situation today is very similar to the situation overall that we faced, which is there's a little bit of weariness here. You've had some lunch. You're tired. You've got other things you're thinking about. That's how it was to try to get Congress to pay attention to cybersecurity in the area of Trump. So, it's, it's very hard to get your energy, but I will try to be as high energy as I can to respect the fact that most of you want to be taking a nap right now. So, one of the things that we hear is that, and of course, the first thing to wake you up is that, I'm not the first to do this on the stage. Everyone could be killed by a cybersecurity event, right? That's just the scary thing you open with. And a mass casualty event is one of the scariest things that you can imagine. That is not actually the worst. So if you get a bunch of experts together from various parts of the healthcare industry in the United States, and you have them all kind of ask, what's your nightmare, and what's your nightmare, and what's your nightmare, and then you merge them together in kind of a nightmare soup, then you realize that the worst thing that could happen is what we call a crisis of confidence, which is to say, that there's an event that would damage healthcare systems so profoundly that people would lose trust in it. The auto industry is having an issue with this right now with its recent wrecks with the self-driving car for Uber. If a state or country decides that they're going to postpone by, say, half a century because there's a trust damage because Uber kills one or two people in a car, the ultimate number of people who are killed by the lack of shifting to that better technology will be much larger. Right? So when you damage trust, you can actually have a worse outcome than a mass casualty event. And of course, anti-vaxxers are another good example of that. To again emphasize the complexity of trying to hold attention with Trump, without getting too much into it, I only have so much time. One picture I think should serve 1,000 words. This is Dennis Rodman wearing a MAGA hat and advertising a cryptocurrency based on marijuana. This is what I had to compete with when we were trying to get attention for this from a technology perspective and a policy perspective. There's just no way to work with that. So I'm saying a lot here without actually getting into anything, but you all know, so we're moving right along. How many people know who Edward Snowden is? How many people know who Peter Buxton is? This is the whistleblower who exposed the fact that against their consent, people were subjecting African Americans and blacks in the United States to illegal STD experiments, the famous Tuskegee syphilis experiment. So probably the most relevant whistleblower in healthcare that I can think of, and someone who you should know. And this is another example of denial of trust. There are still people in the United States who fail to get proper care because they profoundly mistrust the healthcare system as a whole because of something that happened. So again, a mass casualty event, as bad as it is not the worst thing that could happen. There was an event where medications, blood factor with known HIV tainting, were sent to Central America after they had been ruled out for use in the United States. Again, there's all kinds of people in Central America, especially hemophiliacs, who will never trust, the medical institutions in the United States as a result of these things. Much more damaging. How did I get here? And I explain this not to brag, but so you understand my biases somewhat. I started out, my first job was at the Air Force Information Warfare Center. I was a contractor there. Had a lovely cybersecurity career the last few years, all the way to speaking at DEF CON 10. And someone died in cancer in my family, and I realized I felt like I was wasting my life. And I decided I was going to change. So I got into health IT, and I did a lot of work on health IT, and I also got into patient activism. And I'm wearing a jacket here with one of these art pieces, but this is the walking gallery, and it's people who want to try to bring into healthcare conferences the patient experience. It is very easy to have a cardiology conference, for instance, where you have 5 days and you talk about all these hearts without ever talking about the experience of people who have these heart problems. And so this is a way to remind ourselves that we're really dealing with a patient experience. And that, along with one other thing, and what I do now is I'm a healthcare data journalist. And of course, you might ask, what is that? The answer is most of the time I don't know, certainly not at family reunions. But I have a presentation so I can show a slide, which makes it much easier to explain. This is a geodiagram of the data set that I released describing how healthcare providers in the United States share patients. It has 50 million rows, but if you geocode the endpoints on each one via zip code, you can see all kinds of really interesting information, including how patients move from New York to Florida for the snowbird effect, all kinds of interesting other stuff. This is a very large data set. This is kind of what I do for my day job, and that's the thing that combined all four of these things, knowing some things about cybersecurity, being a patient activist, knowing a bunch about healthcare data. And they needed someone on the board who wasn't making money on cybersecurity or really on from the industries that had the cybersecurity problem to come and represent patients. And I tell them what I told them every time I get asked to be on a government committee, which is, I'll do it, but please take someone else if someone else volunteers. And I'm very certain that no one else volunteered because they chose me. So I am not terribly religious. I do not believe in hell, but if there is such a thing as hell, I submit to you that there is a place for it for people who read slides like this at conferences. So I'm not going to do that. And in fact, I just want to talk about the strategy overall. We thought about all the things that could go wrong in healthcare, and we created policy recommendations. Those policy recommendations are so boring. You can literally read them to go to sleep at night. There's the link to those recommendations, and I want to summarize them here for those of you who could read quickly. But mostly, I'm not going to talk about what we recommended, because if you look at what we recommended instead of being concerned and understanding what we were worried about, then there's all these nuances that are lost. So I'm going to talk to you instead about what we were worried about. And mostly it's that in healthcare we have different attack surfaces, and things in normal cybersecurity mean different things. And then there's some other kind of major issues. The distinct attack surface is kind of a really complicated subject. For instance, my understanding is that Israel has a unified electronic healthcare record. That's great from a performance perspective, but that means if there's a hack on that one thing as an entity, it's dangerous. We have a diversity of EHR systems, which sucks actually for coordinating care on just about every other use case, but is slightly better because it means that if you hack one, you don't necessarily destroy all of them. So there's lots of ups and downs there. Getting into that, how many people know, and again, I apologize, how many people here are medical and consider themselves medical professionals primarily? How many people consider themselves cybersecurity professionals? All right, so as a data journalist, it's my job to sneakily gather data. I appreciate that. And so how many people know what this is off the top of their head? How many people know that it was the Jude Medical device that was shown to be vulnerable by Muddy Waters? All right, so the same group of people. So this was one of the hackable healthcare devices. I'm going to come back. I'm going to try to give you a little bit of extra nuance on some of the issues that have already been talked about today. And the extra nuance is later. How many people know what this is? It's a smart TV, but very specifically, it was one of the ones that was vulnerable to the CIA Weeping Angel attack. Why do I care about that as a cybersecurity healthcare professional? Well, what about this? Right? And this is a reinterpretation of the cybersecurity threats in regular cybersecurity that people don't think about in a healthcare context. If you buy a personal TV, you probably replace that personal TV, if you're me, every year, and if you're normal people, every 3 years or something. But if you buy a smart TV for something like this, it's going to be there for 10 years. And if that's a listening device, right, for 10 years in a medical room like this, that's a significant problem because there's all kinds of data that leaks out under that. And so there are normal cybersecurity problems that are harder in healthcare like this. Okay, all of these cars were released in 1964. Now, one of the things you've heard here is talking about the value of healthcare data. That is not actually, again, I want to go a little past that. Everyone knows that healthcare data is more valuable to steal than regular data. That's something that people have said. It is not just that it is more valuable to get. It is more valuable because of its change in value over time. So if you look at this diagram, the top car, which is the reason I chose 1964, is the most expensive car that was ever sold at auction. Down here on the bottom, we have a car that you actually have to pay someone to get rid of. You have to pay someone to come to you and take it away. Its appreciation over time has gone negative. In the middle, you have something that's generally in the middle. Normal data, like credit card numbers, are the same as the Volvo. Right? 20 years from now, a credit card from this year is worthless. It's totally worthless information. They change them every 3 years anyways. Right? Healthcare data is up here, right, in the more expensive area. And the reason is that if you publish someone's DNA now, 20 years from now, you're actually going to understand the implications of that DNA much better, right? That data becomes more valuable over time, right? Same thing with your blood type, right? If they find out that there's a particular response to a medication, they find out if there's a particular mental health issue that's related to blood type, your blood type, even simple information like that, grows in value over time. So it is an appreciating asset. That's the reason why we should be concerned about things like an EHR system gets broken into and, the pediatrics data was stolen. Well, that could be the pediatrics for the next prime minister of Israel, not this year, but 30 years from now, right? You see what I'm saying? So it's not merely that it's more valuable, it appreciates in value. So it's a different class of asset. All right, so you can't avoid health without talking about sexual health. And the first thing you're going to learn if you talk about sexual health is that you have to kind of be willing to at least admit that people who are too old or too ugly are still actually having sex. So I'm going to give you the pro tip of how to think about this. You want to recognize that people want to have sex and not imagine them wanting to have sex. You'll thank me later when you figure that out if you're ever in a position where you need to know that. But you trying to resolve your sexual needs is a critical part of healthcare, and it is healthcare information. And cybersecurity events that happen at dating sites or Grindr, they matter. And it is cybersecurity in healthcare. And it's also one of the few cases that we've had where data breaches have resulted in suicides. So there's been at least 2 or 3 suicides as a result of the Ashley Madison breach. How many people know about that breach and know what I'm talking about? Right, so many that I'm not going to go too much into it. I'd like to examine that a little more carefully, though. So here's the bad circle. Right? Some porn-only sod signs up for Ashley Madison. Then there's an ideologically motivated hacker who breaks in and gets the data out. And then that ideologically motivated hacker publishes the information to the dark web. And then a different hacker with a specialization in professional extortion downloads that data. And then you get these 5 or 6 emails in the mail saying, you have to pay me $500 or I'm going to tell your wife that you were looking for an affair. How many hacks, then, were here on the board? Non-rhetorically, how many? 2, right? Obvious answer. No, there were 3. The first hack was that the dating site didn't actually operate with integrity, and that when they did the data analysis on the bots, they found out that there were no women on the site to go find women who we wanted to have affairs with. Now, I know that half of the people in this room are not surprised that women do not use a website to find men that they want to have affairs with. I know that. But there are people who would think that's a reasonable phenomenon, and so the first hack was disingenuousness on the basic terms of service, right? Basically, a basic unethical perspective. I want you to think about this, and I also want you to look at this. This is the cascade that we're concerned with, which is to say, you have one thing happen here, something later happens on, and then you have something that gets worse, and then you have this cascading effect where there's a snowballing, and the bad thing that happens really gets much worse. Of course, and the perfect example is Grindr. I'm not going to spend too much time about this. I assume this crowd knows about Grindr. Windows XP is the classic example of the old operating system. This is a much more subtle problem than you might think, and it's because of Android. Android is the new Windows XP, right? There's lots of a diversity of Android devices. They're not maintained very well. And more importantly, if you plug it into a USB device, there's all kinds of people who are going to be plugging in very old Android devices to charge on the EKG machines. right? Because they have these little USB ports that are supposed to be just for programming and getting data out. So there's a combination effect, and again, this is this cascade where you have an issue of an old operating system, and then you plug that operating system into a device that's not being updated. And even the medical devices and the MRI machines, I can't remember where the speaker is who was talking about they found the medical device that was wide open. The reason why those medical devices are wide open is because when the FDA requires you to get certified against a particular MRI machine, it's the operating system used to read the data is part of that certification. So you are saying this version 6 MRI machine uses Windows XP, and that's what it's certified with. You cannot update that operating system and maintain its FDA certification, right? So the problem with that is that if you're a wealthy hospital in a major city in the United States or in Tel Aviv, you upgrade your system eventually and you move to the $25 million MRI that has Windows 10 and you kind of there's a pace here. But MRI machines come out much less regularly and the updates of software come out much less regularly, 2 or 3 or 4 years. And we all know in order to maintain the pace, there is, for operating system updates, it's more like you have to update every month, right? So you have a fundamental life cycle mismatch between these large medical devices and the operating systems that they connect with. The other problem with this, and again, I'm just trying to give you a little more nuance besides what kind of everybody else is saying, is that this is an exported problem, which is to say that when the Tel Aviv hospital gets the new $25 million replacement for its Windows XP MRI machine, they don't just throw away the old MRI machine in the bin. Instead, they sell it to a rural provider, they sell it to a provider in a developing country, and that problem gets exported. And we found lots of examples of the cybersecurity problems in countries that have wealth being exported to countries that don't have wealth, that don't really understand or have any of the infrastructure required to protect them, right? Am I providing nuance? I hope I'm providing a little bit more nuance. Am I doing an okay job? You're all asleep. All right, so NHS, the WannaCry attack, here's a nuance for this, and this is depressing nuance. I'm really happy that we have WannaCry, and it's exactly what the previous speaker was saying. Not that many people were killed by it, only a few hundred probably. Sounds like an awful thing to say. But this could be so bad that what we need is really big wake-up events that don't actually hurt us very much, and that can have an inoculative effect, where we get the political will to work on cybersecurity without that many people dying or being seriously hurt. So I'm very sad, and obviously I don't want anyone to be hurt by WannaCry, but really we need something. So we're actually kind of pleased with it. The other thing is that it happened a lot more than was publicized in other countries than was publicized. The only reason why you see things about the NHS is they have transparency laws. Okay, how many people know about the Muddy Waters fiasco? I encourage you, if you're interested in medical devices, to look in the Muddy Waters thing. There is no party who did the right thing or even close to the right thing here. So if you're interested in responsible disclosure or coordinated disclosure or any of those kind of subtle issues, study this because it was as bad as you could possibly do. Now, but the class of vulnerability was actually one of the classes, and this happened like 4 times while we were with the thing, where we expressed a concern, and then it happened in the real world a month after we expressed the concern. And it was that someone would release information about a 0-day against a medical device or EHR software in a way that would maximally negatively impact their stock price, in order to reduce their price, which is probably one of the best ways to make money at this. It's just so horrible to say that. The most effective ways to make money at this is to do something like this. And so we were very concerned that that might happen, and in fact it did. One of the things that's interesting about WannaCry is how little money the actual ransomware makers made. I think it's under $100,000. They cost billions and billions of dollars worth of damage across the globe. And I think they walked away with $100,000. And the real problem is that there's somebody else who looks at that profit margin and goes, that's cool. I'll do that again. How often can I do that, right? So the profit for the people who are doing these kinds of things is deeply problematic. Okay. How many people heard about the Merck hack? You guys are a super informed crowd, so I'm really pumped about this. And it means that I'm going faster, which is cool. So this is the first hack that I believe will have, one of the things that we were concerned about is these kind of generational problems. There will be a few women who die 20 to 30 years from now because they did not get HPV vaccine because Merck, and actually, just so you know, the Merck cybersecurity event did not impact the HPV vaccine pipeline directly. But the fact that they're going to spend, I believe it's probably going to be $500 million before it's all over, said and done, on this problem means that that money was not spent resolving the issues of their HPV vaccine. So what is essentially going to happen is that when a pharmaceutical maker gets hacked, what that translates to is a vaccine that doesn't get made or a cure that doesn't get built. And it's very, very hard for us to quantify these very long-term impacts. It's just hard to get excited about it. This is something new that I don't really know how to evaluate. It's placebos sold online, digital placebos. I don't know what to make of that, but it's definitely a new class. And then just in general, the way that social media is impacting our mental health. In summary, I'd like to encourage the thinking about these events. Think about cybersecurity and healthcare as a subset of patient safety, which is that if you can prevent a harm to a patient, you have an ethical obligation to do so. That's what patient safety is. And in fact, cybersecurity is just one aspect of that movement. And then be willing to look at the problem behind the problem, because there's a lot of things where, why is the MRI machine hackable? Well, it's hackable because of some fairly subtle regulatory stuff that's going on. I hope this was interesting. I hope you've gotten some nuance. Thank you very much.